Dr. Uche. Welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time, if you're watching it on YouTube or whatever other platform, it's so great to have you. I am a lifelong reading enthusiast and also a family history enthusiast. I come here to share works of fiction. I do book reviews. I do children's book read alouds. And I also share tips to help people write their autobiographies, memoirs, and the like. Before I go ahead today, if you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and hit subscribe. Also, if you hit the notification bell, you'll know when I upload new videos. So, guess what? Today I'm reviewing a book that I just read and absolutely loved. This is Black Cake by Charmaine Wilkerson. As you know, if you've been here before, I love to review books, works of fiction from across the diaspora. And here I went to Jamaica. I went to the Caribbean. I don't think it wasn't so much Jamaica. It was the Caribbean. That's where this book is mostly based. But the people talked about in the book, the characters, I should say, sort of traveled all over to England, to the US, and so on and so forth. But I'm going to start right now. I'm just going to go for it. This book is all about family. It's all about family secrets. It's a little bit about immigration. It's even a little bit about the experience for an African American family, an African American individual living in America. They talk a little bit about that. Or living in the UK for that matter, especially at a particular time. So the challenges of immigration. This book is also about family traditions. And as you can see, it's called Black Cake, and it talks a lot about Black Cake, which is a family tradition that is very much discussed in this book. It centers around a young woman, Coventina. But before we get to Coventina, or Covey, she's called, today I'm sipping peppermint tea. You know I love tea if you've been here before. This is from my favorite Michelle Obama mug, and it says, excellent from the start. Okay, peppermint tea. Coventina, we get to learn about her along the way. Before we even get to meet the young girl Coventina, we meet a woman, middle-aged-ish, Eleanor Bennett. Eleanor Bennett and her husband are raising children in California. At the beginning of the book, we learn that she died. The husband had died some years earlier, but at the beginning, she had just died, and her children, Benny and Byron, are summoned by her attorney to come and talk about the mother's estate and things she left behind for them, things she wanted them to know about. They didn't know there was much more to it. Now, it turns out the siblings haven't talked to each other in 8 years. Something really huge happened, some big misunderstanding. And the daughter, the younger of the two siblings, pretty much went away and didn't stay in touch, didn't get back in touch with her family. She pretty much turned her back on the family. We also get to see little by little that the son Byron became fiercely successful, very successful. And he happened to have a doctorate in marine research. So that was kind of his thing, mapping the ocean floor and that sort of thing. So this family attorney is a certain Mr. Mitch. And somehow he gets these siblings together to listen to a recording. Their mother left a recording behind. And this is a recording, well, they had no idea what was going to be in it. But this recording takes them on some amazing journey of discovery. The realization that the mother they thought they knew, wasn't quite who they thought she was. The father either. And there was so much as far as family secrets that parents had not told them. So You know, at some point near the beginning, they just kind of flipped from Eleanor Bennett's children over to a young girl called Covey, growing up in the Caribbean. Covey Coventina, the full name. We get to learn that she is descended from um, Chinese people, people of Chinese ancestry who settled in the Caribbean. And so her last name was Lynn Cook. Now, the family name for her father was Lynn, as I recall, but somehow the name Lynn Cook stuck because there was a parent or grandparent who was a cook. So it looks like there were people of Chinese ancestry who came to build the Panama Canal. This is I guess it's a part of history. I didn't know about that. And many of them under horrific conditions. And at the end of it all, many were ailing. Many had died from the horrible situations while doing the construction work. And some had actually found a way to argue for them to be allowed to go to the Caribbean to recover and spend the rest of their lives there. So apparently there is a large a group of the Chinese diaspora that ended up in the Caribbean. So that was good for me to learn about. And Coventina descended from that particular ethnic group. So growing up, her mother leaves the home. She wakes up one morning and her mother is not there. She never quite could understand why her mother left home, but turned out her father had gotten into gambling and the mother didn't like that. So my guess, and they don't really explain this very well, is she got fed up with the lies, the gambling, the money, and all that stuff, and she left. Turns out that before she left, there was a young woman called Pearl who had lived with and been a helper to the family. So Coventina's family with her dad, her mom, and her mom, Coventina's mom, Matilda, was the first one described in the book who had perfected this black cake. She was really good at baking black cake for people for their weddings. And this talent passed on to Pearl, a young lady who was a helper in their home. So even after she was gone, Pearl continued to bake for people and became quite known for her black cake. And so as you can imagine, Coventina or Covey got that skill from Pearl. Now also Coventina made some really good friends growing up, a friend called Bunny, and a young boy she became very romantically interested in, Gilbert, I believe was the full name, but Gibbs is what he went by. So growing up, as you can imagine, in the Caribbean, next to the ocean and so on, these kids were expert swimmers, expert surfers. And they really formed a bond around these shared interests. Unfortunately, things went very south or very sour for Coventina. Her father got in some shady deals with some shady people on the island, and he owed them money. And so he figured the only way he had no way of getting out of that arrangement. So in effect, he basically allowed one of them to get involved with his daughter, or let me put it this way, because that sort of polishes up a very nasty arrangement. He basically sold off his daughter to be married off to some man who he owed big money. And the man was quite a thug in the area. Bad reputation, people getting missing, people getting beat up, his people all over the place sort of harassing people. This is the kind of shady guy that this Coventina's dad, Lynn Cook, gets involved in. And so Coventina is an innocent bystander. She gets in this whole thing. This man, Little Henry, I think Little Henry, a little man, or Henry is his real name, but they called him Little Man, actually insists that he must have Coventina as a wife. And that was going to be how Lynn Cook was going to pay for what he owed him. So unfortunately, against her wishes, Coventina ends up in this marriage. Can you believe it? So, but at the wedding, this little Henry drops dead. I'm going to have you read to understand how this all transpired. He drops dead, and so Coventina escapes. So, this is the most important foundation in the book. That story of how Coventina escaped. So, she's a fugitive. She's wanted because people think she killed this man. She escapes, and her dear friend Bunny and Pearl, they figure out a way to assist her, and she gets on her way. Somehow, I'm going to let you read that. She gets on her way to England. And in England, she is all alone. She cannot connect back with people at home who knew her because that would expose her, right? Remember, she's wanted by the authorities. They think she murdered that little man, or Henry guy. Besides, remember, that guy is a thug. He has his folks, right? His people. And if they knew she was alive somewhere, they might go hurt her or hurt her people. They'd actually assaulted her dad already. So even her dad, the gambler, didn't know she was alive. They assumed that she swam away and actually died at sea or something. So she's in England. She's forging ahead with her life. She meets some other young women from the Caribbean, makes friends, and I'm going to try pull out the highlights. She gets a job. Eventually, she leaves the family she came with. She gets her own job. She gets assaulted at work. She gets pregnant. She has a really dear friend along the way. That's before she gets pregnant, actually, who dies when they're on a train, some sort of train trip, a trip by rail. There's a horrific accident. This friend dies. She survives. And there's this big mix-up where people think she is Eleanor. Now, Eleanor, or Ellie, is the one who died. Coventina survived. But there's a mix-up because now they think Ellie is the one who survived. So somehow she morphs. Coventina morphs into Eleanor. And mind you, the news does leak out that there was a Coventina Brown who died in this horrific derailing train accident. And so this news gets back to the islands. So people now sort of know she escaped. She got up there, but she died, right? And meanwhile, she becomes Eleanor. She ends up somewhere in Scotland, gets a job. That's where she gets assaulted, gets pregnant, has a baby girl, somehow gets coerced into giving up her baby girl when she didn't quite understand what the issue was, or what some people, nurses, or not nurses, nuns taking care of her were trying to do. So she really gets coerced into giving up her child. So she has this vacuum in her heart, and she is trying to cope with this loss and pain. A young girl, no one to help her, doesn't know where to go, who to turn to. But one little joy comes into her life. Gibbs, that young man she had romantic feelings for when she was growing up on the islands, who left for England before she had her little marriage and the guy dying at the wedding. She meets back with Gibbs in England. So this becomes a happy reunion for her, but they make a decision. Both of them were going to go dead to the world. They were going to change their names, move to the US, and try to get away from anybody who could possibly know or identify them. Because mind you, they still don't want anyone to know she's alive, right? It could have ramifications for her dad or people who had helped her, people who helped her leave the Caribbean. So she's kind of under the radar, carrying on with her lives, a different name. She becomes Eleanor Bennett, and the man, Gibbs, becomes... trying to remember Gibbs, the name he takes, Bert, I think Bert Bennett. He ends up becoming an attorney. So they have these two children in California. They're California born and raised, and they grow up, and then things start going sour because the son, as I said, Byron, becomes fiercely successful in his career, a doctorate, and the daughter, Benny, has a lot of issues come up. You know, she's traumatized at school. She becomes a college dropout. And then her family cannot make peace with her her sexual preferences. She dates men and women, and her parents do struggle when they're told about that. So much so that it all comes to like a boiling point at one particular dinner at her home, and she thinks she's not being supported. She storms out of the house, and that's how she doesn't talk to anybody for 8 years. But in a very roundabout way, we get to see how in the recording, Eleanor Bennett is now telling her children the story of her life, how she escaped from place to place, what she went through after leaving the islands as a fugitive, how she had a daughter in England who ends up adopted. She's coerced into giving the child up, and how she really wants to get her child to reconnect with her daughter. So your sister, the issue of their sister came up, and that's shocking for them to hear about. They didn't even know there was such a thing. So later on, there is a reunion. You know, it's a very intricate web of how this person knows this person and this person has this interest, and some people have become really famous along the way. That friend Bunny has become a very famous, world famous long distance swimmer. She swims oceans. I'm talking hours, and she's now in her 70s. She's going around giving speeches about how we ought to protect the earth and so on and so forth. And a very pleasant thing is Eleanor actually manages to meet back with her friend before she eventually passes of some terminal illness. So at the end of it all, the attorney reconnects, was able to hunt down the daughter left behind in the UK, right? Raised by a loving couple, was able to hunt her down. Eleanor had connected back with Bunny, and Eleanor, in her recording and letter she wrote to Bunny, asks her to help her children to reconnect with a number of people. So the first is Pearl, who has now relocated to the US and is a grandmother in her 70s, I think, living in Florida. The second was not a very happy reunion. This is her 90-something-year-old father, Mr. Lynn Cook. He's already also relocated to the US and doing fairly well, had married a third wife, they say, and has a bunch of stepchildren and grandchildren through his stepkids. And they reconnect. It was not a happy reunion. Byron was livid with him for having caused their mother so much strife. The three children come together and they're going around meeting all these people. And at the very end of it, their mother wanted them to share a piece of black cake that she'd made for them. And if I'm not mistaken, I think that is how the book wrapped up. I think they sat together and enjoyed a piece of black cake. It was such a touching end to this story. It was wonderfully crafted. Parts of it were predictable, though. Parts of it were like, okay, like what are the chances of people getting that lucky to actually meet back or have the same interest, who had the same biological mother? So obviously the fiction part of it, trying to make it all work, had a happy ending, I would say. I loved it. It reminded me of my mother, my mother, blessed memory, I lost her in 2020. She would always make a boiled fruit cake for Christmas. My mother's specialty boiled fruit cake. And she would make a lot of it, lots of cakes. And she would distribute it to the extended family, aunties and uncles. And, after reading that book, I said to myself, come to think of it, I don't think any of us has continued making mom's boiled fruit cake. So I'm actually going to try. So I found myself looking through the internet to see if I could find a recipe that seemed like my mother's boiled fruit cake, and I found one. And I can't wait to bake and enjoy. And I want to seize this opportunity also to ask, do you have any family traditions? What traditions come to mind when you think of your family growing up? Something your mother did, something your father did. Those are very, very lovely to preserve and to not lose them. Our history, our traditions are who we are. So I hope you will consider passing on a tradition today. Again, Dr. Uche, and I just reviewed Black Cake by Charmaine Wilkerson. I so much enjoyed reading this. I hope you join me when I come back again to either review a book or have a children's book read aloud, or even share some tips to help you write your biography, memoir, or autobiography. And I do all this because I believe in the power of stories to enrich our lives and to showcase our common humanity. Again, Dr. Uche, I look forward to seeing you next time. Take care, be well, bye bye.